Your Partner in Success Radio is a free business podcast with host Denise Griffitts. It's all about great stories, conversation, and context to help you move your business and life forward with actionable tips and advice from her guest experts. To listen and subscribe, just find us on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you consume your podcasts.
Good morning and welcome to Your Partner in Success Radio. I am your host, Denise Griffitts, and this podcast is ranked in the top 2% of the most popular podcasts globally. And it's all because of my truly incredible guests. I am honored and blessed to share time with people who are at the top of their game, and they show up here willing to help you get to where you want to be in life and in business. And today our topic is unlocking business growth, strategic financial insights with Nolan Bradbury. Now, Nolan is the founder of Bradfield Accounting and Advisory, and he is a seasoned financial professional dedicated to empowering business owners to achieve their dreams. And that's an interesting way of putting it. And I'll have him explain that. So with nearly 2 decades of experience in both public and private sectors, it's going to be one of those days, Nolan offers insightful and digestible financial guidance tailored to the unique needs of entrepreneurs. Write that down. He's talking largely to entrepreneurs. His mission is to help founders and owners optimize their accounting, tax, and finance functions, leading to improved business results. And this is important too. Improved business results and a richer personal life. He has a genuine desire to make a positive impact on his clients' lives, serving as a valuable partner on their journey to success. Good morning, Nolan. Welcome to Your Partner in Success Radio. It's good to have you here.
Yes, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
You and I have had a couple of conversations. We had, the pre-interview.
Yeah.
And listen, everybody right now needs help with their finances, whether they're in a business, whether they're me, whether they're anybody. So I really like your attitude about making a positive impact on your clients' lives. So before we get started, can you tell me a bit about you and how you show up in the world?
Yeah. So I'll preface by saying, even though I am a CPA by trade, that's kind of a misnomenclature, if you will. I went to college originally to sort of focus on psychology. I've always been very fascinated by the way and the reason people make decisions, or in some cases don't make decisions. And that has very much, I think, influenced the way I approach working with my clients on the accounting and financial side of things. I think there's a very strong correlation between the relationship we have with money and ultimately how we perceive it and how we approach it, both from a business and personal standpoint. And so my whole thing is coming to clients and meeting them where they're at, wherever that may be, so that we can help course correct if necessary, but ultimately help them better understand and have a better relationship with their finances, so that ultimately they're getting the personal enjoyment that they want and are seeking in their personal lives.
I mean, so many people, and I'm among them, have a interesting attitude about money. It comes from our childhood. And I know exactly when mine happened. It was awful. It really was. My father, and I'll tell you a quick story. My grandfather passed away, and he left a lot of really nice collectibles behind. And one of those collectibles, well, there was a gun rack, something belonged to Eisenhower. I mean, there was a lot of stuff. But I remember I was the oldest of 5 kids, and my father called us into what we called the family room, and he had bags, big canvas bags of silver dollars. And he wanted us to stack them and count them. And they were mint condition as far as I recall. And I remember thinking, now those should have been put away. They should have been protected. They could have been sold later down the road. Nolan, he spent them at the pub.
I can feel the pain in your voice as you say that.
I just clutched my chest when I said it. I hadn't thought about that in a long time. But I remember 9, 10 years old thinking, this doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Even then, I knew it was not the right way. And I didn't know he was going to go drink it. But He did. And that money is gone. All that, I don't know. I think I'm going to throw up. You start talking. So I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Yeah, you're 100% right that a lot of our, if not most of our, at least where we begin in our relationship with money and finances, comes from our upbringing and experiences we have early in life, as is the case with a lot of ways that we approach the world. Um, and I think even more so, this gets sort of impacted and compounded for entrepreneurs and business owners, um, because they sort of have this double relationship with accounting or with finances and money. As individuals, um, to a large degree, we can kind of spend how we want, and assuming that we're able to feed ourselves, like that's enough. We may not make the best choices, but they're oftentimes really kind of only impactful to us. Although, as you pointed out, like it impacts our children if we have them in our families. Same thing, though, kind of it gets extrapolated with business owners, is they have this not only responsibility that they feel for taking care of themselves and their family, but an extension of that is the business and the people who depend upon them for that. And there's a lot of weight that comes with that accountability. And as a result of that, it can be very difficult to understand how to prioritize all the needs and where to focus your time. And and then at the end of the day, what oftentimes ends up happening is themselves, they fall at the bottom of the list. They're the last ones to be taken care of. And that sort of oftentimes further enhances maybe a negative relationship with money because it doesn't make you feel good. If you were an employee, how long would you work someplace before without getting paid? And yet, oftentimes, as business owners, we are the last
Yep.
ones to get paid.
Same. I've done that to myself so many
Yeah,
times.
and that can have a really, as for obvious reasons, really negative impact, not just to how you feel emotionally and mentally, because a lot of your self-worth can be tied up in the sense of pride that you feel in your job, but it can also impact your personal life. If you're married, have kids uh, who depend upon you, and they're looking to you like, why is there no money coming in? Um, these are all sort of things that are not really technical in accounting and finance, and yet are all very much related and can sometimes have larger influences. And so, it's I think as within the industries, I think to not address that aspect of finances is kind of glossing over a lot of the things that need to be addressed.
To ask you, because while you're talking, I'm taking notes, and I wrote understanding strength and weaknesses. As business owners, as people, we do this all the time. We don't understand them, or we don't really excavate them
Yeah.
out. So, what advice do you give entrepreneurs about recognizing their core competencies? And this is an important question. How can they effectively delegate tasks to optimize their time and resources so they don't have to worry all the time, so they don't have to be the last man standing?
Great questions. I would start by saying, and this is sort of a yogiism if you're familiar with Yogi Berra at all, although it's not from him, I always tell people it's hard to be an expert in something when you're not an expert in it. And so part of it is understanding that whatever it is that you ventured out into the world to do as an entrepreneur, as a business leader, that's your superpower, that's your strength. And the things that are not very much in line with that or are not in that orbit, those are the things that you need to be honest with, that other people are experts in. And it's not only okay, but it's the responsible thing in most cases to delegate to them. Oftentimes business owners, we bootstrap, we DIY a lot of things to grow our business because kind of have to in a lot of cases. And then there becomes oftentimes this tipping point where we have to change our mindset from that DIY attitude to let other people do things for us so that we can continue to focus on the areas of emphasis and that we're great at. That can be very hard because a lot
Yeah.
of our identity can get tied up in
Oh,
that
yeah.
mentality, right?
And then you
Uh,
become your own bottleneck.
Exactly right. And what I say to people is you end up creating a job instead of a business, which is really the reason. That's not what you started out to do. Like, you didn't start out to create a job for yourself. You started out most often to create freedom and flexibility for yourself. And so part of it is kind of being aware of that progression that can happen and that development as a leader and as a driver of a business. But I used a word in there that I want to come back to and emphasize, which is delegate. And I think oftentimes business leaders, uh, not intentionally, but they confuse delegate with abdicate. And what I mean by that is that we're very good at, we feel pain around something. Maybe there's an area we don't like. I'll say accounting as an example. Accounting is like the least favorite thing that business owners have to deal with. And when someone can come in and take that off of our plate, we just completely sort of disconnect from that. And we just sort of fully hand that off to someone. That's abdicating. And that's not a healthy approach to anything that you're going to transition off of your plate. Abdication implies you have no responsibility to it. And that's not true. So we want to delegate, and delegate is more about giving specific tasks to others so that they can execute on those. And then, but ultimately we are still responsible for them. And so I think that it's an important relationship to understand in terms of what we actually should do and how we should approach it that will better enable that forward-looking progress in terms of like putting the right people in place and removing ourselves from those situations. And it's about having sort of the realistic expectations about what that outcome is going to look like. Taking things off of our plate and sort of outsourcing and that sort of mentality, it is not a light switch. It doesn't just flip on and suddenly, boom, someone else has it and is running with it. It's like any employee hiring. It takes time. You have to bring people into the equation. You have to somewhat train them and get them up to speed so that they can execute the way you want. I think that is like a very key cornerstone to sort of moving in that direction from doing everything yourself to having a team of people who are great at what they do and are able to be great at what they do.
You can't bring somebody on. I used to see this in the virtual assistance industry all the time.
Yeah.
People say, "Oh, I hired somebody and they were awful. They sucked." Well, did you train them? Well, they're supposed to know. They don't read your minds. So no, that's not how it works. But while you were talking, I wrote down effective time management, which is so important, and you were explaining that and about delegating. So can you explain the concept of a time audit and how it can help entrepreneurs identify high value activities that they should be focusing on, and then, as you say, delegating the rest of it?
Yeah. So important. You called a very important concept there, which is like understanding the things that only you can do, meaning that there are tasks that are able to be handed off to others because the skill and the knowledge is pervasive. It doesn't reside with a singular person. But then there are things that within your business or your industry that only you are really capable of. And so that's really what in a time audit approach, what we're trying to do is identify those things so that's where you're spending the majority of your work. And so one of those things, and I do this pretty regularly, is I use, it's called Timular, I think is the app that I use, but basically just it's a little thing that sits on my computer and a bunch of predefined little tasks or areas that I work in. And when I start something, I click it. And when I stop, I'm done. And it gives me a very good sense of where I'm spending my time. And this is something I've come to learn. I forget who wrote about this. I forget where I read this in a book, but they talk about how poor human beings are at budgeting, particularly when it comes to time. We always underestimate how long something is going to take us. It's partly why lists are so ineffective and actually are very defeative for people. So we start at the beginning of the day, if you've ever done this, and you may write like a list of the things you need to get done. And the reality is, if it's more than like 3 or 4 things, you've probably set yourself up for failure.
Oh, you did.
Because, sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
And you're right. As a kid, I became an enormously effective list maker, I thought.
Yeah.
I never got anything done, and it started really annoying me. So now I have index cards. I have 1, 2, and 3. The big thing is written at the top in a marker, and then, the little small things, the subcategories go into there. But at the end of the day, you're going to think I'm a nuts, but I will take, because I can cross everything off. Or
Yeah.
if I didn't, I'll move it to the next card the next day. But at the end of the day, if everything on 1, 2, or 3 cards is done, I shred them. It's
Yeah.
very cathartic.
Yeah. Well, and the opposite can be true as well, right? Which is if you make a list of, say, 6, 7, 8, God, even more than that things, and you get to the end of the day and you've only gotten, say, 3 of those 6 or 7 done, what is the mentality that you have? You feel like you failed. You have this defeatist feeling because you set out to do something and you didn't achieve it. And that can be really, if you do that over and over and over again, it does have an effect on the psyche. And so tracking that time, as much as I don't like tracking time, to be fully honest, like I'm not saying it's great. If you do it for stretches of time, like a couple weeks, maybe even a month, you do get a better sense of like how you actually spend your day. And you can start to identify trends. When do you sort of migrate towards doing certain activities? Are there points in the day where you're consistently sort of taking breaks because maybe you're mentally fatigued? These are sort of good things to understand about how your approach to work is so that you can then better optimize it and lean into sort of like your natural tendencies. Um, the thing you got to understand is anytime, most of the day, we actually operate in sort of an automated state, meaning that like we're not consciously thinking about a lot of things we do. But when what we do in a day has to be very much focused and we have to think about a lot of the things we're doing, it is mentally fatiguing. Like the days you're most exhausted often are not because maybe you were physically doing a lot, but because the things you had to do that day required your focus and attention. Like you weren't on autopilot. And as a result, like that all comes into play and it helps sort of like explain why some days you're more efficient than less efficient. And I think that time audit you referred to, especially when it comes to virtual assistants, I love that reference because that is a great example of where people they hire one thinking that it's immediately going to solve their problems and they don't really even understand what it is this person is going to do for them or how they're going to have this person help them. Oftentimes you kind of got to do a time audit before you hire someone like that to understand sort of like how much time are they going to be able to relieve you and what are the activities that they can take off your plate.
Documentation. And I used to tell people this all the time. Follow yourself around.
Yeah.
Who's doing the things that only you can do? Okay, write that down. If you're doing things that are just absolutely can be handed over to somebody else, hand it over. But make sure that you have documentation that says this needs to be done. This is how we want it done. Have documents. Don't just say, well, I need you to handle my email. Okay, now what? And then you get mad at the poor VA or the poor assistant, and now you've got another mess to clean up. Just do it properly the first time.
And documenting it, like you said, it also helps set the right expectations. Um, I often tell people that the difference between your expectations and reality is your level of happiness. So the smaller the difference between reality and expectations, the happier you are. And so if you can clearly define for both parties what the expectations are, it's a greater likelihood that you will both be more satisfied or happier with the outcome. But when you don't define that because you don't actually understand what has to be done, the chances of things not meeting your expectations are very high. Not because the person doesn't do a good job, but because they don't actually know what they're being measured against. And you just sort of inherently feel as though they didn't reach what you asked of them.
I've said it 1,000 times. As a web developer, as I used to be virtual assistant, back in the day before everybody with a keyboard became a virtual assistant, we had to spend a lot of time with our clients and make sure that we understood what our role was and what we could do and what we shouldn't do. And only then would I take them as a client once I understood.
Yeah.
But people don't. They're like, oh, well, I'm going to hire somebody and I need them to, 10 hours a week. Okay, for what? Well, I don't know. Back it up. Start over.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I'm in the process now of bringing on a new virtual assistant. And I told her for the first few weeks, I really just wanted her to spend like a half hour in the morning and the afternoons just looking at my email and sort of getting a sense of what's in there and what I've been doing. I told her, I don't really want you to do anything right now. Just go in there, take a look, get familiar with sort of like what it is that's coming in, what I'm doing, just to sort of like relieve the pressure of like you have to do something monumental, but rather I just kind of want to get you familiar with it. And then as you have questions, like let's discuss them. So at the end of on Friday, so we have a call later to talk about sort of like what her takeaways from the week were, things that she's identified, any trends, and then give some feedback from me. In my opinion, and I'm not saying it's perfect, but I think it helps sort of bring her, or will help bring her into the fold a bit better and empower her to sort of give feedback that is going to be helpful, but also sort of help me in terms of getting a clarity on like where she can be really supportive.
Exactly. And I'm willing to bet when you have a conversation with her later today, if you ask her, have you defined any particular categories? If she hasn't, she needs to keep looking.
Yeah.
But she'll probably surprise you. I mean, if you've given her the wherewithal to just get in there, get comfortable, see what's coming, see what's going, maybe help you set up some kind of scripts. I use scripts a lot. Like, I get a lot, just as an example. I get PR agencies for the most part and booking agencies every day.
Yeah.
Can this person come on your podcast? And I've had to write scripts. Yes, I would like to have this person, or no, this is not really in my, my audience won't appreciate it, but they're consistent. I just have to open up the script, I type it in there, and off I go.
Yeah, and I mean that's a great example of that automation versus like being on autopilot versus not, right? Which is you identified something that you were kind of having to repeat over and over again. And so instead of reinventing the wheel each time you had to do that, you just automated it so that you were able to do that more efficiently and without needing to exert as much mental energy on that.
Documents that we were talking about. So I wanted to ask you, and we've talked a bit about it, Nolan, but emotional challenges. I mean, we all have them. I was clutching my chest earlier. How do you address the emotional challenges that come with financial management? And I think we've talked a bit about clear communication, but I think clear communication is really important in financial relationships. Do you have any case studies or, tales that you can tell us about that?
Yeah, I think that there's a word there that you use that I think oftentimes gets overlooked in sort of of how things can be successful in this area, which is the word relationship. So the implication of a relationship is that both parties are equally invested in developing that relationship, not to define it with its own word, but such that like positive outcome comes about. And I would start by saying that a lot of times it isn't viewed as a relationship, which inherently creates a challenge. It's viewed as a transaction, which is not the same thing. So I think starting with an understanding of that and making sure that all parties involved are sort of working towards the same thing and are equally invested, not necessarily doing equal amount of work, but at least equally invested. That's a very big first step. In terms of like case studies, what we see oftentimes is that as humans, we avoid things we don't like. And so I mentioned up front that for business owners, accounting and finance is oftentimes the thing they like the least within their business, where it's the hardest thing for them to want to spend time on, in other words. So if you sort of create this formula, right, we know that we avoid things we don't like. We know that we don't like accounting. We avoid accounting. But most people would also, as business leaders, say, well, I also understand that finance is an important part of my business. Like I can't ignore it. And yet that's what we oftentimes do. And so when we start out in that part of where we try to work with people on is what is it that is sort of creating that resistance. So a lot of times we see that they've had a bad experience in the past. Maybe the data has been unreliable or they've gotten bad information. Maybe the way the information is presented is not meaningful or useful. Maybe that the information that's provided isn't timely. All of these things sort of contribute to like wanting to avoid it because it doesn't bring them any happiness, to make very basic sort of comments on it. And so as you can start to sort of chip away at those things and build trust in those areas, what you do is you're able to invite that person back into the conversation so that it does become more of a relationship. In other words, the person is leaning in to this part of their business rather than where they were, which is leaning out. And as a result of that, their involvement in the numbers enhances the overall success. And so part of it is early on, it's how do we get this information to a place so that that person can lean in? And so part of that is understanding how they think about their business. Part of that is understanding how they digest data. Are they narrative in nature? Do they like videos? Do they like to talk through things? Are they chart or table driven? Um, Oftentimes, financial reports and stuff in general is created in one sort of format, oftentimes by accountants for accountants, and yet the audience is not accountants. And so if we can shape the way the data is presented so that it can be interpreted in a way that is meaningful to the audience, they can lean in more, which then allows for better success. So as far as case studies go, recently worked with a dentist who was growing their practice and was doing very well, had gotten the practice to a good point, but was honestly kind of on the fence in terms of if he wanted to continue in the business. It was very exhausting, very tiring. He's trying to get over some of these like financial hurdles that exist as you scale a business. And what we focused on was not how do we cut costs, how do we focus on like increasing revenue. What we focused more on was the relationship between those numbers to give him a better understanding of, as he spent this money, what did that actually result in for him, and helping kind of understand the rate of return on where he was spending his time and his money within the business. And in doing so over a period of time, it allowed him to get a better sense of where he should be allocating his resources, time and money. And it didn't take very long, in the grand scheme of things, like 3-4 months before he really started to have a better sense of where the opportunities were existing. And that allowed him to then tailor in his marketing in a much more precise way that within a couple months had doubled his monthly revenue. Now, is that going to be the case for everyone? No, certainly not. But it is an example of how once he realized that the information could help him and that it would tell him a story that he maybe wasn't understanding currently, then it allowed him to take that information and apply it in a very specific way, in a way that he wasn't doing before. He was sort of just buckshot with marketing, but this allowed more precision, which meant that he was getting a better return on every dollar he spent on that marketing. And in turn, that overall just increased everything across the board. And so that to me is like a real like success story of how this can be beneficial for people.
I agree. And while you were talking, I wrote down the word curiosity. If I'm understanding you properly, if you are presenting this to your client and asking them to dig in and asking them to take a look, doesn't that pique their curiosity? Like, oh, well, this is not so bad. How can I do better?
100%.
Okay.
I would say I know that I've gotten someone to lean in when they start asking me questions. That's the curiosity coming out, right? And so ironically, how I have found success in doing that is actually giving them less information. There's a tendency when people to give them more and more information because, that's going to give them more to look at. Actually, that just becomes white noise and oftentimes just washes over them and further enhances where they're already at. When you peel away stuff and you can give them just a few things to look at. So I like to key in on like 3 to 5 metrics for people that are very meaningful and they understand. And when you give them those consistently, then they start to ask questions about the context and the trends of those. That's now where you've got them. Now they're interested in that process and they're going to engage more with you. And then that invites a much more meaningful and thorough conversation. And that's really the springboard to success, in my opinion.
To me, and I love what you said about peel away, to 3 to 5 metrics. I'm constantly doing that in my own business. And when I'm talking with web development clients, like, no, you don't need 40 things on your website. Trust me, you don't.
Right.
You've got just a few seconds to get people's attention. What is the most important thing that you want them to know about you or your service or your business? And once you can get them on the phone, then you can, get those metrics out in front of them. But I think that's important. I don't know if it's a people thing, a storytelling thing, but we do tend to give way too much information and we're all excited while we're talking like, oh, what about this and what about this? And you don't realize, especially if you're on the phone, that you're hearing white noise. There's nobody, they're gone. They clicked out. Eventually you'll say, oh, well, lobby. Oh, yeah, yeah, I'm here. No, you're not. I bored you to tears.
When you see this in a lot, like it's actually more pervasive than we really realize. And I mean, I see this in, if you ever watch movies or TV shows, the ones that are oftentimes more engaging are the ones that don't have blatant expose told to you, meaning that like you as the audience has to sort of like want to know what's going on. They're not going to hit you over the head with it. We've talked about it in finance. We see it in all these areas where the more you explain something to someone, the actual less engaged they are by it because their brain isn't having to like think as much. They can actively sort of tune out
Good
because you're
point.
sort of doing the thinking for them, which
Right.
alleviates their responsibility in the process, right? And so you're somewhat doing them a disservice by sort of going that direction. So that's where it's an old adage, but like less can be more in a lot of situations. And I fully agree, and I fully lean into that in terms of like this side of things.
I'll talk myself to death if I'm not careful. Because we're always the smartest person in the room, right?
Yeah.
We need to get over that. We're really not. Well, I can say that, without any kind of humble at all because I live alone. I am the smartest person in the room. So I'm not lying. But the thing is, if people talk at you too much, you do tune out. You really do. So I will often say, Denise, shut up and listen. Shut up and listen.
You're 100% right. I think there's a lot of power in being comfortable in silence. If you really want to be a good listener, sometimes you need to ask one question and then just shut up and let the person sit there with their own thoughts and answer you. And there's this tendency when they don't respond right away to jump in for them because you feel uncomfortable, like you've put them in this weird spot. Quite the opposite. By letting them sit there and have some space to think about it, you're actually supporting them. You're respecting them. You're giving them the space to be honest with you. And I think that that's underrated in terms of like getting to know someone and getting them involved in whatever it is you want from them. Ask if you actually want the answer to a question, then let someone answer it.
We can say think about it or cogitate. I happen to like cogitate,
Mm,
but get out of the way.
mm,
Don't get uncomfortable. They are thinking, which is a good thing.
yes, 100%.
Okay, so this is fascinating. And I like that you're sharing basically your background in psychology or you're studying psychology because what you're sharing here makes perfect sense. And I'm going to have to say, when you think about accountants, you always think, oh, they golf, they're
Yeah.
dry, they're like
Yes.
engineers, they're not very fun. But it's just not true, is it?
Well, it's probably true to a certain extent. I think that accountants are a bit more um cut and dry. I think they're to them, and I put myself in this as well, especially when I was in my younger days. Like I think I was very much infatuated when someone gave me a question to answer it. And what I've learned as I've done this longer is the better question is why are you asking the question? What is the question behind the question? Like I will get emails from clients saying like, "Hey, uh, where is this presented on my financial statements?" Now, it's very easy to answer that for them. But the more interesting question is, why did you email me out of the blue to ask that? Because oftentimes where you can help them is in that question. When you understand where they're coming from, now you can engage with them about it. Well, it turns out that that person's thinking about opening another location for their practice. And they were trying to understand where this expense shows up. Okay. Well, that's a meaningful conversation that you can have with someone there, as opposed to, oh, it's right here. It's kind of if you're ever familiar with like improv, like you the goal of improv is to always sort of continue the conversation and leave it an open-ended question. And when you answer things like that definitively, you end the conversation. And that to me, that isn't as healthy as it could be. You want to engage with your clients, and you want them to come to you. Then encourage interaction with them, get to know them. Like we said, like sometimes you got to shut up and listen, ask them the question, and let them explain to you.
My question would be, after you found out that he was thinking about opening another location. Why did he bury the lead?
It's funny. I think this is purely speculative on my nature because, I didn't necessarily ask that. I think oftentimes um, we don't, maybe oftentimes we feel like we're going to be judged by what we're planning. And so I think if someone came out and with their accountant and led with, I'm thinking of opening a third office, what is the accountant or pick professional in that moment most often going to say? They're going to provide an unsolicited opinion back on whether that's a good or not good idea. The reality is that's not why the person doesn't really want your opinion on that right now. It's this is kind of an odd analogy, but it's like if you ever had children, you go through this process where you are working on a name for the child. And when someone asks you, have you thought of a name, and you give that name, it's almost as though they heard what they heard you say was, here's the name. What do you think about that name? You're not asking for their opinion on the name. And so I think to some extent, I think he probably was resistant because there was a concern that I was going to try to talk him out of it, or that I would have a differing opinion on it. I will say that when he shared that with me, my initial reaction was, that's great. What led to this decision? I was naturally curious. What has changed? Talk to me about what you're seeking to go, or why you're seeking to do this. And what was interesting is when that happened, then you could hear the change in his voice. You could hear, even though we weren't on video, I could feel the body language change, even if that's even possible. And that he was much more engaged in the conversation because I think he didn't feel as though he was being judged by his actions.
That's important. And you can feel body language over the phone. I do it all the time. You know, I can tell, and I know everybody can when, I've said something that maybe didn't land right. I know it.
Yeah.
I know it almost immediately. And I'm like, I am so sorry. That's not what I meant to say. Can I back up a bit? But, you can hear people when they pick up the phone and they're smiling.
Yeah.
You can hear when somebody just, has got that get the heck out of my way voice going on. Yeah, you can tell. So when, and I'm going back into this same conversation because you did get curious and you did have, I'm guessing, a very great conversation with him that led to more conversations as he was able to sort through it in his own mind after the call was over. And I'm willing to bet he came back with more questions and observations.
Yeah, it was interesting because where the call got left was, as we talked through things, I just sort of asked questions like, okay, like, is this what you want? Is this what you're trying to accomplish? Have you talked to your attorney about this? Did this come up in conversation? Uh, Not meant to be judgy, more of a sense of understanding where they were in the process. And where he actually left it is like, this has been really helpful. There's some things I need to take away and kind of think about and talk with. And that's great. And so to me, the conversation was actually left open-ended, which is good because that's not a conversation you want to end right now, considering he's probably 8 to 9 months away from that office being opened. You want to have an open-ended conversation so that there is this sort of circling back around to the conversation and a continuation of it. Talks like that shouldn't be quick and over. They're meant to be repetitive, or not repetitive, but rather continuous and sort of reflective in that nature. So I fully expect that he'll come back down the road with some more questions after he's kind of worked through it. But I think it's important that he was, in my opinion, that I gave him the space to think about things, formulate some new questions, and then give him the chance to come back without any sort of pressure. Right? There's no homework that he was given. There's no, oh, you need to give me this. It was, here's some things to think about. If you want to go talk about that, great. I'm here when you're ready to re-engage and talk some more about this.
As business owners, entrepreneurs, even as, family members, we're always looking for advisors. And I'm not mentioning financial advisors. That's not what we're talking about. But we almost always have a little roster of people that we trust. We know them, we like them, we trust them. And when something, as with this gentleman pops up, who does he go to? You.
Yeah, it's I feel a tremendous honor when a client asks me a non-accounting question. Because to me, what that means is there's a trust that I can help them, even if it's not what they think of initially when they think of an accountant. And so what I always tell my clients is if you have a question or you want to talk about something, I don't care if it's accounting related or not, shoot it over to me. Maybe I don't know the answer. That's okay. I'll tell you. But maybe I have someone that we can go connect you with, or maybe I do know the answer, or maybe I can introduce you to someone. Um, I think to me that is more of what an advisor should be or is intended to be. It isn't about giving answers all the time. It's about creating a safe space to work through challenges with that person. Um,
That's exactly right. I do the same thing. I don't have a Rolodex. Who has one these days? But I have one that belonged to an old friend of mine. It's in my office, and I'll come across and go, oh, all those cards in there just meant so much to him at one time. He's gone now, but we all have an invisible mental Rolodex. And like you said, I don't know anything about that, but I can ask around and find somebody who might be able to help you.
yeah. Yeah. And so this is actually where, I think in the lead in, you sort of uh, mentioned how part of my real goal is not just helping businesses, but helping the people behind the businesses um, achieve the personal life that they're looking for. For a lot of business owners, it isn't just about the business. It's that the business is going to help them do something that they're very passionate about, help create a legacy for them and for their family. And so part of where we sometimes get to with our clients is we help them on the individual side with these exact same things, which is we help pair them with the right professionals. We help not manage, but per se, but sometimes coordinate and facilitate getting some of these things taken care of for them. Things like, even though I'm an accountant, helping make sure that they get the right estate planning in place. I'm not the estate planner, but I can help facilitate it for them, help make sure they've introduced to the right people, make sure they got the right things in place. Those conversations are oftentimes the most beneficial because they give a better perspective of the whole that you're trying to support and help, um, as opposed to just a sliver that you're seeing oftentimes as a professional. And I think that's the differentiation between an advisor and a professional. An advisor is brought in on the whole picture. Professionals are sort of truncated and work on specific things.
So basically, what I'm hearing you say is you help people align their business and their personal goals, or whatever that takes, or whatever it is that they need. And an observation I was writing down is, why is it so important for entrepreneurs to align their business growth goals with their personal lifestyle aspirations? A lot of people don't do that. Listen, you've heard it. I've heard it. I've been in business for a while. Oh, I want to start my own business because I want to take more vacations. Oh, good luck with that. I don't think you know what you're talking about. But they don't, they start in one corner and they get stuck there. And they don't know that you have family, you have all these different things that require your attention. You can't just work, work, work all the time. And then you're going to go on vacation. It doesn't work. And I know I'm not saying that well.
No, I know
Maybe you
exactly
can
what you,
help me out there.
well, and I think I would go so far as say as well as I think a lot of times when we sit down with people, because one of the first things I always want to understand from someone is what is the thing that you're trying to achieve or solve? You don't come to an accountant out of the blue just to talk to an accountant. Like I get that, right? So you're probably reaching out to me, at least initially, because you have some sort of pain or something that you want fixed. So once we start to understand that, that helps us define the thing that we're working towards, meaning that we can make sure that all the decisions we make are with the intention of having that outcome be successful. And the importance in that is oftentimes the goals that people set, they think are very far away and that it's going to take a lot to get there. And admittedly, sometimes that is true, depending upon how audacious their goal is. But a lot of times they're closer than they realize. And that the modifications that are necessary to get them there are not that great. I had a call actually yesterday with a client who owns a business, and we were kind of talking through again what his goals were. And in that process, we started to quantify how much it would cost for that goal to be realized. And so I think he had 4 goals, and we summed them all up. And it included things like getting a new house that was closer to his office, because right now he drives 90 minutes each direction. So 3 hours out of his day is spent commuting to and from his own business from his own house. And so when we added all this stuff up, he needed about $450,000 more a year. Now, that's not an insignificant amount, but as we broke that down into by quarter, by month, by week, he started to have a real sense of like, oh, that's not that overcomable. That's really just a couple jobs being charged a little bit more. And in doing that, I think we created a real sense of empowerment in him, that he felt more engaged because it did feel achievable. And that to me is like the alignment. It's like this, here's this business, and you're spending all this time and energy to do this thing, but for what purpose? It wasn't to grow the business on its own. He didn't wake up one day and go, I'm going to create a multi-million-dollar business for the purpose of being able to tell people I have a multi-million-dollar business. He started this business because he was really good at something, and he got even better at it, and he got well respected. And then he realized I can probably get closer to my dreams if I do this way. But that's oftentimes where business leaders like peter out, is that they don't really take the time to be honest with themselves about what they want, why they want it, so they can put a proper plan in place. Like if I opened up Google Maps on my phone and I said, I want to get, and I said, here I am. There's another thing that Google is going to ask me for. Where do you want to get to? You got to have both. And so I have to know where you're starting. I have to know where you're trying to get to, so we can put the right path in place. And if you've ever used Google Maps, you also know that there's a variety of ways it can take you. It asks you, do you want to drive? Do
I
you want
was
to take
just
mass
going,
transit?
yeah, I
Right?
was
Do you
just
want to?
going to say that. In my case, I live in basically what's a small village in Southwest Louisiana. It's growing, but only because they've started, cutting the cane fields down. But it'll give me 3 or 4 different routes. I'm like, I just want one. Give me the
Why
easy
not?
one.
And this is the thing though, right? Is choosing that route is a preference. They will all get you there. They will just take you on different paths. They may take you a little bit longer. The cost will be different. But the point is that they can all get you there. And so which path you choose is a preference choice. And that I think is the piece that sometimes gets missed, is that's your choice in this process. Is I can't tell you which path you should take. I can really only tell you what the paths are going to look like, what they're going to cost potentially. And then it's about giving you the right information to make the decision that is right for you.
Really important. And I'm going to have to paraphrase my thought, because we were talking about how do you get there? And it is, you make the choice. But I was thinking at the same time while you were saying that people get stuck in their businesses. I've done it. I'm sure you've done it. We all do it. And what popped into my head was people say, wow, this is the way we've always done it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. How's that working out for you?
Yeah. When I was early on in my career and I was in public accounting, you have to prepare these work papers every year. And inevitably you'd start on it and someone would always ask the question, why is it done this way? And the answer was, well, that's how we've done it That's always how we've done it. Well, that's how we did it last year. Okay, great. That's not really an answer to the question though, is it? And I think that, you have to understand like what is the best way to do something for yourself in the moment. Things change over time. Life is not a set it and forget it approach. What worked a year ago may not work the next year. And in order to be able to overcome those challenges and those changes, like you have to be willing to engage in the process, talk through it, understand sort of where you're going with things, and be open to feedback so that you can make the right changes.
And that leads me to my next observation, scaling your business. Most of us want to, but we don't know how.
Yeah. I'll start by saying there's a saying, or there's a principle out there. It's called the rule of 3 and 10. Although, like I said, it's more of a principle than a rule. It's not my idea. Wish it was. It's the concept that as businesses scale in multiples of 1 to 3, 3 to 10, 10 to 30, 30 to 100, etc., that what got them to the last sort of milestone will break and not allow them to reach the next one, meaning that you have to change the way you're doing things to reach the next goal. And I think there's a lot of power in the simplicity of that idea, which is fundamentally, it does make sense, right? If you're a one person business, you don't really have to worry about communicating things, do you? Because you don't have to tell yourself what to do. You just do it. But if you bring someone on, like you mentioned, say a virtual assistant to help you with some things, now you have to change the way you do things because there has to be communication. How do you share the information between you and that person? What are the roles that person is going to fill for you? And so all of that has to change again. And so as you get bigger, whether it's dollar amounts or people or whatever multiple it is, those things will break and hold you back if you're not aware of them. Oftentimes, one of the things I see is as people, they get to they'll pass 300,000 in revenue, say, and they're getting to like a 500,000, maybe 600,000. And there's like this invisible ceiling. They're trying to get to that elusive 7-figure revenue line, and they can't figure out why. And the reality is the answer is quite simple, even if it's not easy. And that's, you're still behaving like a $300,000 business. You want to be $1 million business, you got to behave like $1 million business. You have to change your approaches to things. You can't just sort of do things the way they've always been done if you want a different outcome. And so that will work for a while as you go along that path to the next milestone. But at some point, it will start to break down. The engine can only be run so hot, can only be pushed so hard before it starts to underperform. You start to lose people because they're being asked to do things they're not great at or don't have the capacity to do. You're not able to get the clients because you're not marketing to a broader audience. All these things start to hold you back. And so when you're trying to scale, part of it is understanding when the machine, your business, is starting to break down, and ideally understanding before it happens. The mistake that a lot of businesses make when they scale is they either invest too early or too late, meaning that they bring on people before they need those people, which puts a huge cost burden on them, which means they oftentimes either can't get the revenue to support it, or they take revenue they shouldn't be taking, and so it makes the business less efficient. Or they wait too late to invest in people or in new processes, in which case they burn the existing people out, or things start to break down within the company, and then they are inefficient because they have to now rehire, not just for the new roles, but to replace the roles they had. And as we probably all know, getting people up to speed is not a quick thing. We talked about this earlier on, that it takes time for them to get knowledgeable so that they can be proficient without your oversight. And so that's a really critical piece in this, is understanding where you're at in that process and putting the right indicators in place such that you can see the cracks starting to form before the dam bursts.
When people get to that point and they're just stuck and they're doing all the things that you just spoke about, is it a mindset issue, or have they just not put the proper tools in place?
So I think it's oftentimes both, but I think it typically starts with mindset, because mindset is what's going to prevent you more often than not from taking the action you need to take. And usually it's limiting thoughts. Oh, I don't have the money to do that. Oh, I can't get the people in place to do that. Oh, the tool I need doesn't exist. The challenge with a lot of those limiting thoughts, aside from just being limiting, is they're very binary in nature, meaning when you say them, the implication is it's either this or it's not that. And that's not how life works. When something is not one thing, that also inherently means it could be anything else. I sort of often describe it as when you're facing a decision in your business, it's as though our mind thinks of it as I can either open this door and walk through, or I cannot. But what we don't realize is that that's not the only door we have to choose. That if we were able to step back and look to our left or to our right, we would see that there's a lot more doors stacked next to that one we're standing in front of. And so it isn't just, do we walk through the door that we're standing in front of? Do we walk through the one to our right? Do we walk through the one 3 doors down to our left? There are other choices that we can make that are somewhere between it being black or white, or yes or no. And so if you can get to the point where you don't view decisions like that, you realize that you can be more strategic and that you have much more options available to you, which allow you to be more flexible as you grow and you scale, as opposed to just sort of being like, well, I guess I can't do that. And you throw your hands up and don't do anything.
Thinking of something a podcast guest said probably a couple of weeks ago, and it made so much sense to me. I wrote it up on my whiteboard, but we all have these questions. They pop up. You don't know what to do. And she said, and I wrote it down, does this solve for that? Well, how easy is that?
Yeah.
You look at it and, is this, if I take this door, is it going to solve for this question? Well, probably not. And I'll take the one on the left, or I'll take the one on the right. Or you know what? I like green. I'm going to go through the green door.
Yeah.
Does this solve for that? And once you have that kind of thought process going on, curiosity comes in and you start really examining your choices that you're going to make.
I think that's a great quote. And I think it also ties nicely back to the importance of understanding what that is. Right. To answer that question, you have to understand what it is you're trying to solve for. And so both, you have to know where you're at, right? This goes back to that map analogy. You have to know where you're starting, and you also have to know where you're going. And then being able to ask that question allows you to make a good decision for you in that moment, and choose the right path for yourself.
Exactly. And since I have that on my whiteboard, I'll look up and I'll be working on something. It might be a website. It might be a strategy that I'm creating for a client. And I'll look up and I'll say, take a break and go back and look at what you're working on and figure out, like with the Google Maps, where am I starting? Where is he or she starting? Then I can ask the question, does this solve for that? It made me so much smarter. What can I say?
The other thing, I think this also reminds me of something that I've tried to be very, well, not very, much more intentional about, is I think oftentimes as business owners, we are not present in the moment, meaning that we are oftentimes elsewhere. And I think that can be very dangerous. We get caught up in the decision that's 6, 7, 8 things down the road, when there's no guarantee that actually will ever arise. And so we're trying to solve for things that are not actually problems. And so as a result, they're distractors. And so for you, similar to you, the thing I have written on my whiteboard is be here now. Meaning that I want to be present in the moment I'm at right now. And I'm going to
say that again so the audience can hear that one more time.
It's be here now. It's very
I'm
simple,
writing it down.
3 words, but it challenges me to come back to the idea of, like, wherever else I'm at, my body is here, and so should my mind and my soul and my spirit and my emotions. And that if I can be where I'm at right now, I will be able to be more successful because I'm consciously here in this moment. And that's the only thing, despite anything else we want to think about ourselves, that's the only thing that I'm actually able to do. I can't control something in the future. I can't change something in the past. I can only do what is right in front of me. That doesn't mean I don't prepare for things down the road. It doesn't mean I don't think about them. But in terms of like where I exert my energy, it's in the moment. And I cannot tell you how empowering and how much more happy I am because of that mentality. Like, it removes a tremendous amount of anxiety and depression in some cases, because depression by definition is you feel sad about things that have happened in the past. It's a very simplified explanation. And anxiety is feeling stressed about things that could happen in the future. Well, if you're in the moment, both of those kind of dissipate and you're able to be where you're at. And to me, that is so critical for a business leader. Like, you need to be where you're at in this moment and actually understand the challenges that you're facing here. It's not that other things aren't important and that you shouldn't think about them, but they oftentimes are where we spend way too much of our time and energy. And so the things that are actually right in front of us are not getting addressed.
I love that. And I don't know if most people I think are aware of this, but what you're thinking lands in your subconscious. I don't know about you. When I go to bed at night, well, I don't sleep a whole lot, but when I know that I'm just about to actually fall asleep, I will literally just right after I say my prayers, and I say them out loud so whoever needs to hear them can hear them. And I'm talking to the ceiling fan, but I will literally turn over what has got me stumped, or I need an answer for it, and I'll turn it over to my subconscious for review. And because I tried to keep my thoughts clean during the day, I didn't wander around going, oh my God, I can't do this. I can pretty much zero in on what I want my subconscious to deliver. Nolan, I'm telling you, 3:18 in the morning, doesn't matter if I went to bed at 1. 3:18 in the morning, I wake up and go, oh, thank you. There it is. And I write it down.
I cannot tell you how much I agree with what you just described. I
Mm-hmm.
realize I'm an accountant and we haven't really talked a lot about accounting here, but what you just said is 100% true. I will, when I'm stuck with something, when I'm struggling to work through a challenge that I'm facing, I will ask the question out loud. What do I need to do, or how do I do X? How do I solve Y? And I will just say it out loud. And I find that by externalizing that question, somehow or another, it like puts things into motion to solve that for me. I'm not saying that there's like extra forces at work or anything like that. Maybe there are. But for me, the ability to sort of get it out of my head and actually like define it and say it out loud isn't a very empowering thing that really does help solve those things, or at least give me the next thing I need to do to solve that thing. 100% with you.
Exactly. And that's what, that happens with me. And my poor ceiling fan, especially the one in the living room, she's a lot of dialogue that ceiling fan has absorbed. But if I don't say it, and here's my thinking, when you're thinking internally, it's like a high-speed highway going 40 different directions at once. You've seen those pictures of all these,
Yeah.
oh my God, it just hurts my heart to look at those things. But if you say it out loud, we can only really think and say one thing at a time.
Yeah.
So you have some clarity there. But if you're just thinking it internally, it's kind of like meditating for me. I'll be thinking, okay, I'm gonna breathe. I'm gonna do, oh geez, I need to go to the grocery store. And off I go. So
Yeah.
say it out loud. It
Yeah,
works.
it does.
And we're just about out of time. You said something to me in the pre-interview that I wrote down because I thought it was so important. And you said, and I'm going to have to paraphrase, but something about getting to a place where the next dollar
Mm,
you earn is less important than how you spend the next hour.
yeah.
Can you share with us?
Yeah. So I kind of mentioned a little bit this idea that like where we want our clients to ultimately get to is this point where the next dollar they earn in their business is less important to them than the way they spend the next hour of their life. And what I mean by that is that you're able to shift your your importance, if you will, your emphasis from money to time. Those are the two assets that like everyone thinks about the most. Usually money is the thing that predominates most people, but time is the only asset we can never get more of. It's finite. Once you use it, it's gone, never to be gotten again. And so the liberation that can happen is when you get to that point, uh, then you're able to actually, I think, break through a lot of the invisible barriers that exist, because now you're able to be you're releasing yourselves from the ties of what money can often do, which is hold us back. And so I love it when clients get there because that means that we can do a whole lot of other things for them. that's where the alignment of their personal life and their business life really come into play. It's that intersection of where wealth meets their family. And we can talk about things that are really oftentimes more important to them, or that they care more passionately about, like, what is the legacy I'm leaving? Not necessarily financially, but how do I teach my children or my grandchildren the lessons I've learned? How do I transfer the knowledge that I've gained so that they're a contributing member of society? A lot of times that's the underpinning of why we're doing what we're doing, is we feel this sense of like, I want to better things. And we don't often always give a lot of flexibility to think about that because we're preoccupied by other things, and we don't give ourselves the permission to sort of think, quote unquote, selfishly, even though it's not selfish. And so for me, that's the ultimate objective for me as an advisor, is that we're getting you to that point where now we can be strategic about how can we move things off of your plate so that you get to use your time the way you want to use your time without sacrificing the progress in the rest of your life.
Nolan, this has been a fascinating conversation, and I took 2 pages of notes. I can almost read most of them, but thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your truly inspiring journey and your insights with us. But before we close, is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience, and where can people connect with you?
Yeah, I'll share the quote that I often think of the most, which is, I think it's by Winston Churchill. It's perfection is the enemy of progress. Don't get hung up on things having to be perfect to move forward with them. Starting is oftentimes the hardest part. So don't think things have to be perfect. Just do the next step that you need to take. That's sort of, again, being present in this moment. And you'll find that you're able to navigate things a lot easier and make better progress. As far as where people can find me, you can go to our website. It's bradfieldco.com. Yes, my last name is Bradbury, but Bradfield Co. is the website. You can find me on LinkedIn at Nolan Bradbury. And that's really the only place on social media I am. I do not exist on Facebook or Instagram or those other ones, for better or for worse. But love for you to connect with me. If there's anything I can do to help you, if you have any questions, accounting related, finance related, don't view it as a sales call. Just view it as an opportunity to kick the tires and get some questions answered.
Listen, and I love the quote that you just offered, and I'm going to add a little bit to that. I'm a huge fan of Dr. Napoleon Hill, and Think and Grow Rich. And people don't, what's the secret? What's the secret of Think and Grow Rich? I think he says no. I don't know how many times he says in the book, take action. So there's that. Get up off your butt. Go do what you need to do. Well, listen, for our audience, thank you for joining us today as we explored the vital financial strategies that can help small business owners thrive, with insights from Nolan Bradbury of Bradfield Accounting and Advisory. And we discussed the common challenges entrepreneurs face, from understanding revenue and expenses to the emotional aspects of financial management. And if you found this conversation valuable, please take a moment to review our podcast and subscribe for more expert insights and actionable advice. And why do I ask that? Because your support helps me reach more business owners like you and get them on the show. So until next time, keep striving for your dreams, and remember that with the right financial strategies, growth is always within reach. Nolan, again, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, my pleasure.
Get your voice heard. If you would like to launch your own far-reaching podcast, contact Denise Griffitts at yourofficeontheweb.com and go to the podcast tab.